One of the most unsettling truths about narcissistic behavior is this. Many narcissists don't fully recognize your worth until you've become completely unavailable to them. Ironically, it's often only after they've lost all access to you that they begin to realize what they've taken for granted. And as the silence stretches on, their thoughts can begin moving in directions they never anticipated. Welcome to the Narcissist Expert. Today, we're exploring what truly happens inside a narcissist's mind after an extended period of no contact. If these insights are helping you better understand narcissistic behavior, consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your experience in the comments. Your story could be exactly what someone else needs to finally make sense of what they've been through. One of the biggest things long-term no contact takes away is something narcissists depend on far more than most people realize. Emotional control. This type of control isn't always obvious. It doesn't always involve explosive arguments, manipulation, or dramatic emotional games. Sometimes it exists in much quieter forms. It can be the confidence of knowing they can send you a message whenever they choose and you'll eventually reply. It can be believing that your emotions are still tied to them, or assuming they continue to occupy a permanent place in your thoughts, regardless of how much time has passed. That ongoing emotional access gives them a powerful sense of security. Even while ignoring you, disrespecting you, disappearing without explanation, or remaining emotionally distant, they often feel comfortable because they believe they can return at any moment and still have an emotional effect on you. But long-term no contact completely disrupts that expectation. The moment you stop responding, stop reaching out, stop reacting, and begin emotionally disconnecting, the narcissist loses one of the things they value most: the ability to predict your behavior. Suddenly, they no longer know what you're feeling. They don't know if you still care, if you've moved on, or whether they hold any meaningful place in your life anymore. That uncertainty becomes deeply uncomfortable because narcissistic personalities frequently rely on control as a way to protect their fragile self-image. Your silence becomes proof that they may no longer have the emotional influence they once assumed they had. This loss of control often leads to very different outward behaviors. Some narcissists respond with anger. Others suddenly become warm, apologetic, or unusually affectionate. Some resort to indirect tactics designed to pull your attention back toward them. Although these reactions may appear different on the surface, they are often driven by the same underlying fear, the realization that your emotional world may no longer revolve around them. Extended silence creates both insecurity and confusion because it removes the emotional feedback narcissists typically rely on. For many narcissists, other people's reactions become a measurement of their own significance. It doesn't necessarily matter whether the reaction is affection, sadness, frustration, anger, or desperation. Any emotional response confirms that they still have influence. As long as they can affect your emotional state, they continue to feel important and in control. Long no contact removes that source of reassurance entirely. When you remain silent, they are left without the answers they once depended on. They don't know whether you still miss them, whether you've healed, whether you've finally found peace, or whether someone else now occupies the emotional space they once believed belonged to them. That lack of certainty creates psychological discomfort because narcissists often struggle when faced with situations they cannot control, monitor, or predict. Even if they appear completely unaffected on the outside, many begin internally replaying different possibilities. They may find themselves wondering why you haven't reached out, questioning whether you've truly moved on, or trying to convince themselves that your silence means something other than what it actually does. Without direct access to your life, their mind begins filling the empty spaces with assumptions. Over time, that uncertainty can slowly transform into self-doubt. Someone who once felt completely confident in their ability to influence you may begin questioning whether their impact was ever as strong as they believed. Your continued silence quietly challenges the image they've built of themselves. Many narcissists convince themselves that people never truly let them go, that former partners, friends, or family members remain emotionally attached indefinitely. An extended period of genuine no contact directly confronts that belief. It forces them to face a possibility they rarely consider, that someone they once believed would always remain emotionally available has finally broken free and no longer revolves around them. One of the reasons some narcissists suddenly reach back out is because prolonged silence forces them to face something they never expected, the possibility that you are no longer emotionally available for them to influence. That realization can be deeply unsettling. As a result, they may send unexpected messages, display intense emotions, act unusually concerned, or use subtle tactics to draw your attention back. These actions are often less about genuine care and more about testing whether they still have access to your emotional world. In the beginning, many narcissists respond by pretending they are completely unaffected. Protecting the image they project to others is often one of their highest priorities. Even if the loss impacts them internally, they rarely reveal feelings of hurt, disappointment, or vulnerability. Instead, they hide behind emotional distance, confidence, or a cold, detached attitude because acknowledging pain can feel like admitting weakness. This is why you may notice some narcissists appearing happier than ever once no contact begins. They might become unusually active on social media, showcase a new relationship, post endless photos of their exciting life, or present themselves as though nothing about your absence has affected them. From the outside, it may seem as if they moved on overnight. However, appearances can be misleading. In many cases, these displays are not signs of genuine emotional peace, but carefully managed performances designed to protect their image. They want others, and sometimes even themselves, to believe they remain completely untouched by the separation. This false indifference also serves another purpose. By acting emotionally distant, they may hope to provoke a reaction from you. They understand how emotions work and often expect their apparent indifference to trigger feelings such as rejection, jealousy, insecurity, or curiosity. If you react, reach out, or question their behavior, they regain exactly what they were seeking: emotional influence. Real indifference is usually quiet. It doesn't need to be announced or displayed. It carries a sense of calm and emotional stability. Fake indifference, on the other hand, often feels exaggerated. It looks performative, forced, and emotionally charged beneath the surface. Ironically, the harder someone works to convince everyone they don't care, the more likely it is that your silence is affecting them far more deeply than they are willing to admit. As time passes and no contact continues, many narcissists begin experiencing another uncomfortable reality. They realize they can no longer predict your reactions, depend on your availability, or assume they still have control over your emotional state. For someone who relied heavily on that influence, losing it can feel deeply threatening. Rather than accepting the separation and moving forward, some attempt to reestablish contact through a behavior commonly known as hoovering. Hoovering refers to attempts to draw you back into communication after a period of distance. The methods can vary, but the intention is often the same: to reopen the emotional connection they lost. Sometimes these attempts seem gentle and sincere. They may suddenly apologize, admit mistakes, tell you they miss you, or express a level of vulnerability they rarely showed during the relationship. At first glance, it can appear as though they have genuinely changed. In other situations, they rely on guilt instead. They may remind you of meaningful memories, difficult experiences you shared together, or sacrifices they insist they made on your behalf. They often choose emotionally significant moments, birthdays, anniversaries, or holidays, to reach out because they understand those occasions can lower emotional defenses and increase the likelihood of a response. Another common tactic is an unexpected flood of affection. Someone who was once emotionally unavailable or distant may suddenly become attentive, loving, and intensely expressive. This dramatic transformation can leave you wondering if they have finally become the person you always hoped they would be. But it's important to look beyond the surface. In many cases, this sudden warmth is less about building a healthier relationship and more about restoring access to your emotions. Once they feel confident that connection has been reestablished, the familiar patterns of manipulation, emotional distance, or control often begin resurfacing over time. Although the tactics may differ, the underlying objective is frequently the same: confirming that they still have the ability to influence your emotions whenever they choose. Even when direct communication has ended completely, many narcissists continue searching for indirect ways to remain connected to your life. Social media often becomes one of their preferred tools. They may quietly view your profiles, monitor your activity through mutual friends, or casually ask others how you're doing without ever contacting you directly. While it may seem harmless on the surface, these behaviors often reflect an ongoing desire to maintain psychological access. For many narcissists, losing communication does not automatically mean losing interest. What troubles them most is losing awareness. They want to know whether you're healing, whether you've moved on, whether someone else has taken their place, and whether they still occupy any space in your thoughts. When they can no longer observe or predict your emotional state, they lose a sense of control they once depended on. And for someone whose self-image is closely tied to influence over others, that uncertainty can become one of the hardest realities to accept. Social media often becomes one of the simplest ways for narcissists to maintain a sense of connection after no contact. Instead of reaching out directly, they may repeatedly check your profile, watch every story you post, unexpectedly like something from months or even years ago, or conveniently appear online whenever you're active. Some go a step further by creating anonymous or fake accounts so they can observe your life without revealing they're still paying attention. These behaviors are rarely random. In many cases, they're driven by a desire to find evidence that they still have an emotional impact on you. They're searching for signs that you're hurting, lonely, angry, or still emotionally attached because those clues reassure them that they continue to occupy space in your mind. Sometimes they gather information through mutual friends or family members instead. They may casually ask how you're doing, bring your name into conversations unexpectedly, or quietly collect updates about your life while pretending they have no emotional investment. They often do this subtly because it allows them to preserve the image that they've completely moved on while secretly maintaining psychological access behind the scenes. Understanding the motivation behind these actions is important. In many situations, this behavior has far less to do with genuine love than it does with unresolved control. They may not truly miss the relationship in a healthy emotional sense. Instead, what unsettles them is the realization that your life may continue peacefully without their influence, attention, or presence. For many narcissists, losing access is more painful than the breakup itself. That's because relationships often serve purposes beyond emotional connection. They become sources of validation, admiration, reassurance, and influence. As long as they know they still have access to you, they feel secure, believing they remain significant in your emotional world. Even negative attention can satisfy that need because it confirms they still matter. But consistent, no contact slowly removes every source of that reassurance. They stop receiving emotional reactions. They no longer know what's happening in your life. They lose confirmation that you're still emotionally invested. Over time, this creates what many psychologists describe as an injury to the ego. The pain frequently comes not from losing authentic intimacy, but from losing the sense of importance, control, and emotional influence they once believed they had. This helps explain why some narcissists suddenly become determined to reconnect, even when they were the ones who acted distant, dismissive, or emotionally damaging throughout the relationship. Your silence forces them to confront something their ego strongly resists, the possibility that they no longer have the ability to affect you. For narcissistic personalities, that realization can feel deeply unsettling because the confidence they project outwardly often hides a much more fragile sense of self-worth underneath. Without your emotional reactions reflecting their importance back to them, they lose one of the mirrors they relied upon for validation. Sometimes, recognizing that you're genuinely moving forward becomes even more painful to their ego than the relationship ending itself. Another common reaction is anger. When narcissists realize they can no longer manipulate your emotional responses, frustration often begins to build. Many rely on reactions to maintain a sense of control. Whether they create affection, guilt, confusion, fear, or emotional chaos, the specific emotion matters less than the fact that they're able to produce one. Every response reassures them that they still influence the relationship. As long as you're explaining yourself, defending your choices, chasing after them, arguing, or becoming emotionally overwhelmed, they continue feeling connected to a position of power. Long-term, no contact breaks that cycle entirely. Your silence removes the emotional feedback they've become accustomed to receiving. Suddenly, their messages remain unanswered. Their attempts to provoke you stop working. Their guilt trips, dramatic behavior, and attention-seeking tactics no longer create the reactions they once expected. For some narcissists, this loss of influence becomes intensely frustrating. Over time, that frustration may evolve into visible anger. Some lash out by sending hostile messages. Others spread rumors, become passive-aggressive, or attempt to damage your reputation with mutual acquaintances. Some resort to sarcasm, mockery, or dismissive comments simply because they're hoping to provoke any emotional response at all. In many cases, this anger is fueled less by heartbreak and more by wounded pride. Your emotional detachment directly challenges their belief that they can regain access to you whenever they choose. When that expectation no longer matches reality, resentment often follows. One of the most significant changes no contact creates is something narcissists frequently notice, even without direct communication. It changes you. At the beginning of no contact, many people are still carrying emotional pain. They miss the relationship, question their decisions, and struggle with loneliness or self-doubt. Their emotions remain closely tied to the narcissist, even though communication has ended. But as time passes, something begins to shift. The constant emotional tension slowly fades. Confidence starts returning. Decisions become clearer. You stop measuring your worth through someone else's approval. Instead of constantly reacting, you begin responding with calmness. Instead of chasing explanations, you start accepting peace. That emotional transformation changes the energy you carry, and narcissists often notice it. When someone is no longer emotionally available, no longer easily triggered, and no longer seeking validation from them, the dynamic completely changes. The person they once believed they could influence has become emotionally independent. For someone who depended on your reactions to feel significant, that shift can be one of the most difficult realities to accept. Your silence is no longer just the absence of communication. It becomes visible proof that you've reclaimed control over your own emotional life. In the early stages of no contact, many people are still carrying emotional pain. They may feel anxious, heartbroken, confused, or deeply attached to the relationship that ended. Those emotions don't disappear overnight. But when you remain consistent and allow time to do its work, something far more meaningful begins to happen. The emotional dependence gradually starts to fade. Little by little, the urge to seek validation, demand explanations, or wait for closure begins losing its grip. Instead of looking to the narcissist for answers, you begin finding stability within yourself. As that emotional freedom grows, a new kind of confidence naturally takes its place. This confidence isn't loud, boastful, or attention-seeking. It reveals itself through quiet strength. You become calmer under pressure, more emotionally grounded, less reactive, and far more comfortable enforcing healthy boundaries. You stop allowing the narcissist's moods, approval, or attention to dictate your emotional state. Rather than organizing your life around their behavior, you begin rebuilding an identity that exists completely outside the unhealthy dynamic that once consumed so much of your energy. That inner transformation doesn't always go unnoticed. Narcissists are often remarkably aware of shifts in emotional availability. They recognize when someone no longer responds the way they once did, no longer pursues them, and no longer depends on them for reassurance or validation. Your independence communicates something powerful without saying a single word. It tells them their influence is disappearing. For someone who once relied on emotional control to feel secure, that realization can be deeply unsettling. It's one of the reasons some narcissists unexpectedly return just as you begin genuinely moving forward. They may suddenly become curious about your life, nostalgic about the relationship, unusually affectionate or emotionally reactive after sensing that you've changed. But it's important to understand where your confidence truly comes from. It wasn't created by making them jealous. It wasn't built by proving your value to someone who failed to appreciate it. Your confidence grew because you reconnected with yourself after spending far too long emotionally trapped inside someone else's need for control. And that's what makes it real. When all is said and done, the purpose of long-term no contact has never been about making a narcissist suffer. Its real purpose is to break the emotional cycle that kept your peace dependent on another person's behavior. That is exactly why silence often produces such powerful reactions. Your silence removes their access. It removes their certainty. It removes the emotional responses they once relied upon to feel significant, powerful, or psychologically secure. Some respond by pretending they don't care. Others return with apologies, affection, guilt, or manipulation disguised as concern. Some react with anger, resentment, or obsessive attempts to monitor your life from a distance. Although these behaviors may look very different, many of them stem from the same uncomfortable realization. They no longer control your emotional world. And while they struggle with the loss of that influence, something far more important is happening within you. You're healing, you're rebuilding your self-confidence, you're discovering what life feels like when your emotional well-being is no longer determined by someone else's choices, moods, or approval. That is the real power of no contact. It isn't about revenge. It isn't about proving a point. It isn't about making someone regret losing you or convincing them to chase you. True no contact is about reclaiming your emotional freedom. It's about reaching a place where you no longer feel compelled to justify your worth to people who only appreciated having access to you when it served their own needs. There comes a moment when you stop waiting for them to acknowledge your value. You stop hoping they'll finally understand the damage they caused. You stop needing them to admit what they lost, because your peace no longer depends on their awareness. Sometimes the strongest decision you will ever make is to keep moving forward quietly, carrying your lessons with you, protecting your boundaries, and allowing your life to become your answer. And in the end, that quiet strength speaks louder than any explanation ever could. Trust,